But first, Iraq. And with us are two key members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Democratic Senator Jim Webb and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who just returned last week from a trip to Iraq. Gentlemen, welcome both. Let me begin by showing one more time the President's comments on Thursday at his news conference. Let's watch.
I don't think Congress ought to be running the war. I think they ought to be funding our troops.
Senator Webb, are you trying to run the war?
No, I don't think that there is a war to start off with. I think that this has been a botched occupation. It's been going on for 4 years after the purely military part of it was done. This administration has failed in terms of bringing the right diplomatic formula to the table. All of the things that people like myself were predicting would happen if we went into Iraq are exactly the sorts of things that the President and this small group of people who have sort of rallied around him are saying will happen if we leave. We were saying that Iran would be empowered. We were saying that international terrorism would be empowered. We were saying that the reputation of the United States would be diminished around the world. And we were saying the region would become more unstable. So we've reached a point, and I see with what Senator Warner and Senator Lugar have introduced, that there's a good, strong feeling among the Republicans as well. We've reached the point where we have to come together as a Congress and attempt to bring some order into this.
Are you trying to wrest control of the war from the President, in effect, along with the Republicans?
No, I think that any administrative discretion, any executive power has its limits. And the Congress has the authority not only to appropriate, but to put conditions on, for instance, how our troops are being used. You can go back, for instance, if you want to look at the amendment that I offered, which Senator Graham and a number of others opposed, even though we got 56 votes. The provision goes back to something that the Congress did when Harry Truman was president, when they were sending troops to Korea who had not been trained, and the Congress stepped in and said, you can't send anybody overseas until they've been in the military for 120 days. We're trying to do this on the other end. 4 years into a war, you have to be able to put some rational limits on how our troops are being used. We've got soldiers and Marines right now who are spending more time in Iraq than they are in the States. And the executive branch isn't speaking up. The Congress has the constitutional power to do so, and that's what we were trying to do.
I'm going to get to your amendment in just a second, but I want to ask Senator Graham. Senator Lugar, Senator Warner have stepped forward and said we should have another vote, in effect, another reauthorization of this war. And secondly, as early as January of '08, perhaps have a redeployment of troops in Iraq. Do you support Senator Lugar and Senator Warner?
No, I respect them very much. I believe their idea is for the President to come up with a plan B. They said the surge is not working in October. Tell us about how you would redeploy troops with a different mission. You know, control al-Qaeda. They say nothing about the Iranian influence. It basically takes us back to the old strategy. And the one thing I've done on this program and others is declare the old strategy of fighting behind walls and training as being ineffective. The new strategy of getting more combat power where al-Qaeda and others reside, I think, has been enormously successful. But as to whether it's a war or an occupation, in my view, this is very much part of a global struggle. Al-Qaeda has come to Iraq. Bin Laden has said this is the equivalent to the Third World War. Baghdad's going to be the center of the caliphate. We have just passed unanimously a resolution that's saying that we're in a proxy war with Iran. So what's going on in Iraq is not about us wanting to own Iraq. It's about us supporting a form of moderation not known to the Mideast. Why does al-Qaeda come? They come to destroy this infant democracy. That's part of their agenda, is to fight moderation where it exists. Why does Iran kill Americans? Why are they trying to drive us out? Because their biggest nightmare is a functioning democracy on their border. So this is very much a gigantic struggle between moderation and extremists, and those who want to withdraw or have operational control reside in the Senate. I think you're making a mistake for the ages.
Let me turn specifically to Senator Webb's amendment. And this is how it was described. The Webb amendment said any armed services member deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan would have the same amount of time at home that they serve overseas before being redeployed. It also required that no troops, including those in Reserve and National Guard units, could be redeployed to Iraq or Afghanistan within 3 years of their previous deployment. An attempt to reduce the strain, obviously, on military families. when Congressman Murtha of Pennsylvania introduced similar legislation in the House, it was described as a slow bleed, an attempt, in effect, to micromanage the war and bring the war to an end by limiting the number of troops that were available. Was that your intent?
Congressman Murtha's provision had a lot of restraints on it, and I think you could argue that it was micromanagement. They had equipment restraints on it. They had unit readiness indicators on it. And let me say, I used to do this for a living. I did this for 3 years when I was Assistant Secretary of Defense. I had the first 120 days of war, how you lay out the transition from peacetime to wartime, how you merge the reserves in with the Guard, et cetera. And what I did was I tried to take the one unassailable fact here, and that is that 4 years into this environment, we've been experimenting with one different operational requirement versus another. I was going to say strategy, but this is not strategy. And at a minimum, we have to be able to say that if you're going to do this, if you want to stay in Iraq for 5, 10 more years like Senator Graham does, or if you want to get out within a couple of months like Congressman Murtha does, we have to put some restraints on how our troops are being used. And by the way, I want to just respond really quickly to a couple of things Senator Graham said. You know, he says Al-Qaeda has come to Iraq. That is true. There is no greater recruiting tool for Iraq, for Al-Qaeda, than the United States being in Iraq. Al-Qaeda was not operating in Iraq before we got there. And, you know, this resolution that we supposedly passed where we were saying we're in a proxy war with Iran, that was some whereas clause way up when we basically said that the ambassador to Iraq has to tell us whether Iran is tactically involved. It's pretty noteworthy to point out that in terms of Iraq, more than half of the extremists in the Sunni areas are Saudis. So what we're seeing in Iraq is the countries that have historical ties with these different ethnic groups are, in fact, involved. But that is not the same thing as saying we're in a proxy war with Iran.